How's it going, YouTube? It's LBMTG, and welcome to the channel. This is only like the second video I'm posting, so you got here early and just in time. Because in today's video, we're going to be tackling one of the most important topics when it comes to deck building. That's right, we're going to be talking about mana ramp and lands. Specifically, we're going to be targeting the Commander format just because that's the most prevalent. However, you can take this and run with it in your future deck building with other formats like Modern, even Legacy. Today's video, we're going to attempt to challenge how you approach your lands, your mana base, and most importantly, your ramp. All right, this is easily the most ridiculous setup I've ever had, but we're going to rock with it and hope it doesn't fall over. But like I said, in today's video, we are going to make your decks better, make you better at deck building by challenging how you approach putting ramp in your decks. And for starters, the number one most important way to improve your decks is to play the proper land counts. This is being preached all over the internet, and for very good reason. Because if you consider the Commander format, the format is designed for 4-player tables, 4-player pods. So ideally, your deck sits at or above a 25% win rate. Just like in 2-player games, you aim for, on average, about 50% or better. Better than 50% means that you have a winning percentage. In Commander, winning a quarter of your 4-player games is about on par, and anything better than that is significantly better. Now the problem is that's you're set to kind of win a quarter of your even games where you are actively participating, but any games that are lost or basically null and void because you got mana screwed cut into your 25%. They don't cut into the 75%. They don't contribute to the 75% of your losses that your opponents won. They contribute to the 25% of your wins that are lost. So what I'm trying to say is you are actively damaging your 25% instead of building upon that 25% by playing too few of lands. So take this deck. This is a Lord Windgrace. It's a 5-mana commander that is, honestly, it's a land commander, very land-heavy commander, because you want to discard lands in order to use his +1. And I took 2 separate hands that are 7 cards each and laid them out. Now, on first glance, the top hand has some gas. It has Eternal Witness, it has some 2-mana ramp, has a 3-mana Realms Uncharted, which is great for finding lands. The problem is this is a 1-land hand, and most notably, it cannot tap for green. You do have Faithless Looting to try and hit that land, but really, this hand, no matter how gassy it is, I mean, like, even Tyler's Tracker, this hand has the gas. It just simply does not have the lands to make it work. So this would either be a mulligan or almost guaranteed a loss. Basically, this hand on average, or any given hand, has about a 25% chance to win. But since you are creating inconsistency, creating a fail rate where you don't draw that second land, you can't cast your Rampant Growth, and then all of a sudden your 25% chance to win is now down to like an 18 or a 12 even, depending on how many times or how many turns you just don't draw a land. But then you take a look at a hand like this. This hand is significantly worse in terms of gas. Archfiend of Ifnir, not really doing anything. Vandalblast, these are just like kind of removal cards, like kind of iffy. Honestly, they're close to being cut from the deck. But you do have 4 lands, albeit some are like Utility and Bajuka Bog and a bounce land, but you also have a Shared Roots and an Ancient Tomb. So although this hand has like much less gas and is much less sexy, the chances of winning with this hand are so much higher than with this hand because you have ways to ramp out your commander and get going from there. Yes, you're still at the mercy of your deck, but you were playing about 60 bombs in this deck, but you're only playing about 40 lands in this deck, so the odds of hitting the bombs are much higher than hitting additional lands for hands like this. Now, the important thing to note is that a lot of people, when deck building, they find really cool cards that are really good for their deck. Maybe they pull like a big 6-mana enchantment or a big dumb creature like Archfiend of Ifnir, and they're like, I really want to make space for it in my deck because it goes well with my commander, or it just goes well with the theme of the deck. But the problem is a lot of people's first thing is like, well, I can cut 1 land going from like 37 down to 36, and who's gonna know? How many games am I gonna lose where I don't draw this land but I draw this instead? Well, it's honestly a lot more than you think, because not only are you cutting this one land, and yes, this one land might win you less games, but you're also reducing the density of lands in your deck, and the odds of you drawing a 1 or 2 land hand go up significantly when you cut this land versus when you keep the land in. So number one, above all, is just make sure you are playing enough lands. On average, I think most of my decks have like 38 or 39 lands, and even that's kind of cutting it close, because if you think a 60 card deck plays or is suggested to play 24 lands, keeping those same rates, you should, in theory, be playing about 40, a little less than 40 because your commander comes into play, but about 39.6 something lands in your deck in order to get the most consistent results and draw enough lands. Also factor in if you are playing a commander that is heavy synergy around just having more lands. Whether that be a commander like Lord Windgrace, where you want more lands in your hand to discard in order to get use. You can also think of some of your land slots as spell slots. Like if I played 45 lands, odds are I'm going to discard about 5 lands per game. So technically I'm not playing 45 lands. I'm playing 40 lands and then like 5 spells that I just discard away to draw more cards. You know what I mean? So consider that. Even decks like Omnath has a landfall mechanic. You want to guarantee that you are hitting your land drops not just on the first 4 turns, but even turns beyond that. So playing even upward to like 42, 43 lands in landfall decks, even more, is a fantastic option. And once again, this is just the best way to increase your win rate by simply just playing more lands. Yes, it would be awesome to put that big bomb in your deck, like, oh my gosh, I want to play Boomy Unleashed, but I want to participate in more of the games that I sit down for, instead of staring at my 2-land hand wishing that I draw the 3rd to play that Cultivate. Alright, the next big topic that I want you to consider when deck building is the type of ramp that you play. On paper, this one can be extremely simple. A lot of decks answer this question for you. For example, my Renegade leader, my Azuri Elf deck, it's very easy. We're going to be playing some big old stinky creatures, right? Like we play creature ramp in this deck as opposed to like land ramp. The downside to that, though, is you are much more likely to encounter a board wipe of creatures in your creature decks. Like you are much more likely to encounter a Wrath of God than an Armageddon. It's just factual, right? So while the creature ramp is very explosive, it is kind of tied down to mono green, or not mono green, but playing green in your deck, and you are just creating this glass cannon. Like, yes, you are very explosive out the gates with these 1 mana creatures that can tap for mana, but you are much more susceptible to many different types of removal. That is why in these decks, you ideally want to play creature ramp in decks that can protect those creatures. Azuri has that built in. Regenerate another target elf. That's fantastic. You also want to protect your ramp with different spells in your deck, like Heroic Intervention. Like you build your creature ramp decks with the fact that you know one of your deck's weaknesses is creature ramp. So if you want to increase your win rate in decks that favor, like clearly favor creature ramp, build your deck, take out some of those big dumb like Craterhoof Behemoths, add in Heroic Interventions to protect your creature ramp, and your win rate will go up. Probably not Craterhoof, but you know, one of those big dumb creatures like Regal Force or something, and your win rate will go up. There are also other very obvious options with other types of decks, big ones like artifact decks. Artifact decks are very simple. You want to play artifact ramp, you know? Same with like enchantress decks. Like I have an enchantress deck somewhere near here. You want to be playing enchantment. You want to be playing enchantment ramp. Because like you have to consider it's not just what your commander is. Like yes, Brea is an artifact. So does that mean that you want to play artifact ramp? Not necessarily. You want to see what your commander and what your deck as a whole wants to be doing. Brea wants to be sacrificing artifacts. So in order to convert your ramp into things that you can, like fodder that you can sacrifice later on, you definitely want to be playing more artifact ramp in decks like this. And we'll talk more about this topic later on. But decks like Enchantress decks, they're pretty tricky because decks like this one, this is a Shrine deck. It's a 5-color commander, so it is a lot harder to build ramp packages. You kind of have to play a mix of everything. But since you're playing cards like your Enchantresses, things that draw you cards or benefit you in some way after playing an enchantment, these now all of a sudden these ramp spells are kind of turned into draw spells later in the game. Whereas if I were playing like a Farseek here, for example, Farseek just goes and gets me a land. Yes, that's arguably more resilient. It won't die to the same board wipe that all my other enchantments will die to. It doesn't do as much for me late game, so it kind of becomes a dead spell the later we get into a game, whereas Utopia Sprawl can draw me into that next piece of gas that could win me the game from there. That being said, this is a great opportunity to talk about how demanding your commander is. Decks like Brea are ridiculously commanding. While most of the deck will be these colorless artifacts that are easy to cast with things like Soul Ring and things like that, it's still worth noting that there are a significant number of games that you probably just will not be able to play Brea if you play too heavily into cards like Soul Ring. Obviously, I'm not saying don't play Soul Ring, I'm just meaning those ones that create colorless pips. Rather, you should be playing more artifact spells, even if it's a weaker ramp spell. Like if you're, instead of playing a Worn Power Stone in a Brea deck, you can just play, or I guess like a Thought Vessel. You can play more cards like Arcane Signet, because like while Thought Vessel would be great in those games where you draw more cards, Arcane Signet's going to just make sure and help guarantee that you can get Brea out, because it can help tap for that ridiculous mana cost. Same with even things up to 5-color decks. You do have to be more aggressive with your ramp, but it's mostly to not only help you ramp out your spells, but now you also have to factor in fixing. So for that reason, my decks like Shrine decks, or like big 4-color, 3-color, 5-color decks should be more aggressive, playing worse quality cards, but in order to guarantee more of the time that you get your big, beautiful, sexy stuff out. Like I am playing Birds of Paradise and everything up to like Cultivate and Kadama's Reach. Like I am very much more aggressive with my ramp in this deck because it's 5-color than even my Lord Windgrace land deck. I'm not even playing some of these spells in the Windgrace deck because it doesn't really need it. It doesn't need the fixing as well as the ramp, whereas this deck I want to ramp out quickly and go from there. But a great example is, in that I just showed you that I am playing Farseek in my 5-color Shrine deck. I need to take that out and put Utopia Sprawl in here. Or maybe keep Farseek in and take out Cultivate. Yes, it would be great to grab 2-colored lands from the deck to guarantee fixing, but the ramp that Utopia Sprawl provides fits the deck more, the synergies more. So while this one is, these first two, number of lands and type of ramp, are much more obvious categories, I promise you these next two are going to challenge how you think, even if you're a returning player. But before we get there, I do quickly want to shout out something. Look, this video is obviously not sponsored. I have no subscribers on this channel, but I do make shorts, and I think that if you're watching this video, you will find my shorts so entertaining. So definitely after this video, check out the shorts. But now let's talk about the two most important ones, and that is mana mapping. Or another way to think about this is the objective of your deck. So we're going to keep it very simple at the start, and we'll build from there. But let's take a look at my Azuri Renegade Leader deck. And what do I mean by mana mapping / the objective of your deck? Well, first, think of it like, what is the first big action that your deck wants to do most of the time in order to join the game? As an elf deck, to put it simply, I want to play... Ideally, I want to play like one of my 3-drop big ramp elves on turn 2. So turn 2, I want to be doing this as often as possible. So this is a very simple example of this, but I'm going to structure the rest of my deck. I'm going to map out my deck in ways that help me get to this objective. So I want to do this as much as possible. And in order to do that, I want to play enough lands to where I will have 2 lands per opening hand at least. Even though this is an aggressive deck that doesn't really require as many lands as things like my Lord Windgrace or your big like Omnath decks, you still want to play enough to help you meet your objective. On top of that, I want to play as many 1-drop elves as possible. Look, it's an elf deck, so this is, like I said, this is kind of a stupid example because it's an elf deck. Obviously, they want to play 1-drop elves. But I want to open with a land, turn 1 elf almost every time. And then that way I can play things like Circle of Dreams Druid or Elvish Archdruid, these 3-mana elves that tap for a lot of mana as often as possible on turn 2. That is my objective with this deck. Now, it's not always like this. Like, some decks want to power out their commander. So while this deck wants to map land 1-drop into land 3-drop, that's the ideal mapping, a lot of decks don't necessarily want to do that. So let's take a look at another pretty simple example that we've already talked about. And this was one of the reasons why I pulled this one out. Breya. Breya, one of the ideal ways that you could map out Breya is that you want to simply play Arcane Signet on turn 2, turn 3, untap, play a land, play Breya. And then you're set up in a pretty fine spot. Alternatively, you could play other things like Soul Ring with 3-mana ramp spells in order to power out something else before Breya, but it really depends on how you want to build the deck of Breya, which I realize she is too shiny to show up well on the monitor. But thinking of different ways that you can map out your deck and how you want to play your spells and sequence your spells is a fantastic way to approach your building of your ramp. On top of that, we've already kind of touched on Omnath. Now, I don't have an Omnath deck, but I have plenty of different ways that we can kind of sequence and look at this. Omnath can be built in so many different ways. Ideally, though, you have to think about when you want your lands and how you want them to enter, or where you want them. A deck like Lord Windgrace wants your lands in your hand, because then you can use a card like Cultivate, which will allow you to play Lord Windgrace 1 turn earlier, so on turn 4, but then it will also let you have an additional land in your hand to discard to Windgrace. So cards like Cultivate are much better than cards like, say, Ranger's Path, which just looks for 2 lands in your deck, puts them into play. While this would help you power out Windgrace, it doesn't really contribute to the objective of the deck, and it doesn't really map out your turns how you would like them, quite like it would in Omnath. So Omnath is very tricky, where you do want a considerable amount of your 2-mana ramp spells. So you want to either play Omnath on turn 3, so you want to play spells like Farseek, great example. As many of these as you can fit in your deck, like your 3 visits, like anything that can help you get Omnath down a turn earlier, so you want to play as many 2-mana ramp spells as possible. Also, Omnath is a pretty forgiving deck, where you also want to play cards like Cultivate, because Cultivate allows you to hit multiple land drops in a turn. It itself puts one onto play, but it also guarantees that other one in your hand to play to trigger the landfall as much as possible. So decks like Omnath are very, very easy to map out how you want your ramp. But now that we've taken a look at a pretty easy example, I mean, like I said, Omnath literally can get away with anything. As long as it ramps lands, it's probably going in Omnath. A more complicated way to look at this is a deck like Rune. Rune also is playing green, so this kind of is a more simple example, but really this just means that I have more things to talk about. So Rune is a pretty tricky deck. Like Windgrace, it's a 5-mana 3-color deck. So you do want some fixing ramp. You don't necessarily want to play everything like Worn Power Stones, a bunch of like Soul Ring type effects, although they would be great at ramping you out quicker. They do kind of create that risk of just not hitting the correct colors. But when you think about a Rune deck and how you want to play the game, your most ideal way to map out your game is you want to play a 3-drop ramp spell that is a creature. So in order to do that, you are playing as many as you can find. So you're playing the Wood Elves, the Farhaven Elves, the Elvish Rejuvenator, things like Clifftop Lookout. Look, arguably, these spells on paper are worse than Cultivate. But just like in our previous topic, the type of ramp that you're playing, Creature Ramp, especially repeatable with ETBs, is fantastic in a deck like Rune because he can blink creatures. So all of a sudden, the value of these spells goes up significantly in a deck like this, so you want to cut spells like Cultivate, although Cultivate would help you power out Rune. That's not really as big of a deal as getting out synergy pieces that also help power out Rune. So playing spells that are worse can be better for your deck, and that is a very important thing to note because I find so many people playing deck cards like Cultivate in decks that really, honestly, don't want Cultivate. So in order to do this, in order to play a 3-drop creature that finds lands to help you power out an earlier turn Rune, you also do want to play cards like Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch. Delighted Halfling is a fantastic example because it makes him uncounterable. But all of a sudden, you have the same thing that my Elf deck has, where on turn 1 you play a Noble Hierarch, turn 2 you play a second land, tap for 3 mana, play Farhaven Elf for one of these 3 drops, and then turn 3 you can then power out Rune, and then turn 4 start flickering that Farhaven Elf, going to Value Town. So mapping out your ideal turns, like what turn do I want to start impacting the game? Do I want to play a Panharmonicon? Like, I could build this deck totally differently. If I want to play a Panharmonicon or some big 4-drop as my first big entry into the game, then I could build this deck differently and play 2-mana cards, like play more things like Coiling Oracle that are 2-mana creatures that get lands, or I could even play Farseek in this deck if I wanted to build this deck with a 4-drop as my first entry into the game in mind. But like I said, the way that I've built this deck is I have mapped it to where I want to go 1-drop into 3-drop into 5-drop. So I've loaded the deck full of things like even Farhaven Elves, or not Farhaven Elf, like Llanowar Elves. Like, I am loading up on 1-mana creatures, even though, like I said, playing a Glass Cannon creature base to ramp is worse and more susceptible to removal than things like playing a land ramp. The deck demands that. The deck wants creature ramp for a deck like this. So mapping out your deck and understanding the objective can help you prevent yourself from putting cards like, let's pull out an example. Instead of putting cards like Noble Hierarch in the same deck that plays Cultivate. I mean, yes, these two synergize well because you can map Noble Hierarch into a turn 2 Cultivate, that's fine. But then why would you then play a Ranger's Path? You would need a very specific deck to want all 3 of these cards. I guess one great example could be if you wanted to build your Omnath deck in a way where you're playing more 3-mana spells and then playing more big mana spells that get you more mana, like Ranger's Path, then you could build your deck in this way. But once again, this all has to do with mana mapping. So sit down, map out your deck, find the big turns. Like, even if it means like laying your deck out in mana and just seeing what your big turns are and how you want to sequence your turns together, then you can really construct a ramp base that allows you to play the game in such a way. And then the final step, after you've challenged yourself and thought about how these lands and how these spells really impact your deck specifically, now the simple thing is to build your ramp package. This can be as simple as laying out as many ramp spells that you can find and then going through them one by one and thinking, what do they provide to the deck? So a card like Colony Heart Expedition. Every time a land falls or a land enters the battlefield, you put a counter on this. You can remove 3 counters, sacrifice this, and go and get multiple lands, 2 basic lands, put them into play. Would Lord Windgrace like this? Windgrace is playing a ton of ramps, so you would be able to power up Colony Heart Expedition. But really, on turn 5, why would you then want to go get 2 more lands? It's not really as synergistic as it is in a deck like Omnath. Omnath, you play this on turn 2, turn 3 you play some ramp spell to help power out your Omnath, and then turn 4 you can play Omnath and pop the Colony Heart Expedition, triggering the landfall immediately. Boom. This goes in this deck very easily. Let's take a look at a card like Ranger's Path. We've already kind of talked about it. Search your deck for 2 forest cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is fantastic ramp, fantastic fixing because you can get dual lands. However, once again, a deck like Windgrace, you don't really have much that's triggering landfall. Yes, you do build the deck with landfall in mind, but really this doesn't help you restock your hand with lands. It can't get utility lands like dredge lands that can be then put back into your hand to continue to power Windgrace. It doesn't get anything that can fuel your graveyard for ways that build that. So while this does trigger your landfall, so do many other ramp spells. So you probably would not put this into a Windgrace deck, but you probably would put this in an Omnath deck. You can play this turn 4 instead of Omnath, and then that way you could play Omnath and another spell when you play it. Or you can play Omnath first, play this second, and then all of a sudden you're guaranteed 3 land drops in a turn. So Ranger's Path, auto includer, or easier of an include into Omnath than it is Windgrace. Take a spell like Cultivate. Cultivate powers out Windgrace and gives you another land in your hand to work with in case you already had one to discard to Windgrace. It's a fantastic inclusion because it maps very well into Windgrace while also providing synergy into what Lord Windgrace wants to be doing. On that same token, it guarantees that after you spend 3 mana, it puts the 4th mana into play while also providing you a land for a guaranteed landfall in Omnath. Also, this is much better in a deck like Omnath come late game when you have 20 or so lands out because it can just help you guarantee 2 land drops or 2 landfall triggers per turn. So all of a sudden, Cultivate looks fantastic in both of these decks. Whereas a card like Llanowar Elves, Llanowar Elves is much more of a question mark in both of these. Llanowar Elves probably would never go in an Omnath deck, even though it's very powerful. It's a 1 mana creature. It just, one, it can't contribute. You're spending a green to cast it, so unless you have like plenty of dual lands in your deck, it's not going to help contribute to that risky cost of Omnath, so it's already very questionable. It can help you power into things like Cultivate, but the risk is too high with a card like Llanowar Elves. You would rather play something like Farseek that attempts to do the same thing, powering you out a turn earlier, but this also can help power out Cultivate a turn, or not a turn earlier, but can help power your Cultivate, but also help power your Omnath. Now, you would be much more likely to consider Llanowar Elves into your Lord Windgrace deck because, one, it's a lot less risky with that mana cost because it can contribute to the green or the 2 colorless. It also can help map into things like Cultivate a turn quicker to get you off, the back ropes a lot quicker. However, once again, these decks are so high synergy with specifically lands that you probably just have better options. So when you're building your ramp package, although you would rather have everything, you would rather have all the ramp possible, you will have to cut some things that, although in the most ideal scenarios with your mapping, you aren't going to construct your whole deck to do this mapping quite like you would with a deck like Rune. Rune is much more likely to map into those 3 drops because there's so much more of them. There are plenty more 3-drop creatures that do this than there are 3-drop ramp spells that do this. Like, yes, there are some that grab like basic forests and stuff, but nothing does. This and Kadama's Reach are kind of like the only 2 things that do this. So you can't really build your deck to map this way like so. So you probably would not put Llanowar Elves in either of these decks. So let me fix my camera. Hopefully it's fine. But hopefully this video helped you and challenged you in your deck building. Making this video has made me go back and re-look at some of my decks that I thought were fine. But really there were some games where certain cards just felt clunkier. They didn't really synergize with how the deck wants your ramp spells to behave. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to put in more cards like Utopia Sprawl in my Enchantress deck because that is what that deck wants from ramp spells. It wants early ramp that can also draw cards late game. I'm also in the process of building a Brea deck, and while I do intend on that deck drawing a lot of cards, I'm not going to be playing cards like Thought Vessel because it just does not help Brea do its thing. Yes, you can sacrifice it, but there are plenty of other cheap artifacts that tap for mana, that tap for colored mana that can help power out Brea, unlike Thought Vessel. So doing this like thought process and really challenging each specific piece of ramp spell that you're putting in your deck can make your deck so much better. On top of that, as long as you're playing enough lands to power out the deck, you're going to increase your win percentage very simply by playing the games that you're intended to play. You're going to play your 25% share, at least, of wins. Guys, this has been the video talking about ramp and how to improve your deck building skills. Hopefully this has helped you as it has helped me just simply making this video. I've done some long car rides and I've been theorizing and concepting this video for quite some time, so I've had this discussion with myself for weeks now. But now I finally got to turn it into a video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully this format is passable for now until I can find a secondary camera to do my face cam and the table cam at the same time. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Like I said, we are brand new. This is a brand spanking new channel, so any likes, any comments, any subscribes greatly help. And hey, hitting subscribe is free. It's literally free. We play Magic, there is nothing free except for hitting the subscribe button and liking, but it really helps me a ton. It's like a free ramp spell, right? Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know what comment or topics you want me to talk about in future videos, and I'll make sure I make those videos happen. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care, guys.